You've survived another year of parenting. It's not easy, but the advice from the experts help. That's why we are taking a look at some of the most popular episodes of Mom Squad from 2024.
I do want my daughter to have a cell phone because I want her to, be in a safe place, and I want to know where she's at all times. But as far as like during education, I don't play that.
From how to protect your kids while they're using smartphones to the bans and restrictions schools placed on them.
And if you don't enforce your rules consistently and for the long haul, then it's just another rule that's out there that's not going to be followed.
We also take a look back on our most watched interview, how ADHD appears differently in girls than boys.
Once it becomes disordering or, disruptive to what they are doing for their day-to-day stuff, that's when we need to really be concerned.
And we round out the show with advice from the psychologist who helped develop Disney's Inside Out 2.
I don't want parents to be frightened that the presence of an uncomfortable emotion is on its own grounds for concern.
That's today on Mom Squad. Hi everyone, I'm Maureen Kyle. Thanks for joining me on Mom Squad. We've been doing this show for about 3 years now, and I have to say, this past year is some of the best advice that we've ever gotten. And thanks to you, we know which episodes grabbed the most attention. One issue that every parent needs advice on: kids and cell phones. At the start of the 2024 school year, many schools across the country banned cell phone use in some way. We covered the change in an entire episode, but one of the main concerns was over safety. Take a listen to the conversation with Ken Trump, a school safety expert, on why he thinks cell phone use in schools is a distraction.
With a PhD in education, Dr. Ken Trump remembers when the first cell phones started to pop up in schools.
And cell phones were originally banned in schools. You can't have it. It was associated oftentimes in the early years with gangs and drugs and bad things. So we had originally started out with bans of cell phones in schools. Then there was a pivot to the horses out of the barn. It's hard to manage this. Let's look at them as educational tools.
He's watched cell phone use evolve to the almost constant attachment kids now have.
And now we're talking about complete bans. But cell phones are disruptive to the educational environment. You simply cannot pay attention fully to the classroom teacher, the instruction, what's going on when you're worried about getting your latest text, your latest message, your latest information on TikTok or other social media. So there's that competition for the brain space. We have to remember that the executive function of the brain with kids does not develop until the mid-20s. Literally, there's research that shows the brain does not fully develop its executive function, the prefrontal cortex, until the mid-20s. So that social trigger is going to supersede any other brain message that's going on over classroom instruction or other things if the kid's triggered by that social brain trigger, that dopamine, that ping that's going to cause that kid to divert their attention. So without a doubt, it's disruptive. We see cell phones that are not only disruptive to the instructional aspect, but they're being used for bullying, cyberbullying, setting up and arranging fights, increasing agitation, things that lead to physical altercations. So there are many downsides. The cell phones are a double-edged sword. They are positive side, they can be instructional tools.
Trump doesn't envy the teachers. He says enforcing restrictions will cause an even bigger issue if teachers aren't supported.
As a parent, one of the biggest challenges and the biggest pains that I have, like any other parent, is managing cell phone behavior, cell phone safety, cell phone appropriately use, simply just not texting me during the course of the day because I'm working and you're supposed to be working as a student. Parents are also guilty a part of this because they text their kids and want some type of instant response, even if the kids aren't communicating with them. So it's just a mess in terms of managing it. The question really isn't whether we need a law. Schools can implement and have implemented their own policies. The question is, how does it work day to day? How are you going to enforce it? How are you going to discipline the kid? Are you going to increase the battles?
And the big question, will a ban even work? Kids are pretty smart.
If you make the rules, you have to enforce it. Behavior without consequences is permission. And if you don't enforce your rules consistently and for the long haul, then it's just another rule that's out there that's not going to be followed. So the key is, are you, for school districts, are you willing, once you set the policy, to consistently enforce it, to deal with parent pushback if that happens here and there, to deal with the battles with the kids when those happens, and do you have the political will as much as the administrative will to follow through with this, not just today when you create the policy, but months, weeks, and years ahead.
I know a lot of parents want their kids to have a cell phone in case of emergency. So if you go back and watch the entire episode, Ken explains why he thinks a cell phone in your kid's hand during the unimaginable, like a school shooting, actually puts them more at risk. Now, another danger to kids when it comes to smartphones is not putting the right protections in place when they get their device. You don't want the wrong people being able to get in touch with them. Our tech expert and dad of three, Brandon Simmons, had this advice after the holidays last year about how to set up those devices with safety in mind.
Step one, as counterintuitive as it sounds, you actually want to get that device back from them. So you give it to them, you let them play with it for a little bit, but you have to be involved in that setup process. That's the key to the whole thing. If you're not involved from the beginning, you're probably going to get locked out, which the thing is, you want to be tuned into what they're doing. So as soon as you give them full control over that device, you let them do the complete setup, I bet you it's going to be pretty hard for you to get back in and be able to control the things that you want to see.
So what is it about that setup? Like, is it sharing the same email address, or what is it in that setup? Because I know we've gone through this before and we totally screwed it up, where then it's like a different account and a different, so where is it that we have to make sure things are the same?
Here's the first parental mistake. Most parents, or some parents I'll say, they actually sign in with their own accounts thinking that's the easiest way. That's probably a no-no. I'll tell you why. One reason is because once you do that, they have access to your account, they get control of the parental controls as well, and also for you, it's a lot harder to provide that separation that you need for their device. So what I recommend first is you give them their own email address, you set it up, but what you do, you have to make sure you set them up as a child underneath your account. That's where you get to start that control portion of making sure you know what they're doing, kind of being able to set up filters, different things like that. You get control over what apps they download, what things they can look at and not look at. So if you don't do that first, you're going to probably find yourself in a world of hurt when it comes to trying to get back in there later and try to see what they're doing and monitoring their devices.
So let's use Apple, like I'm an Apple family, for example. So when I'm setting them up as a child in our account, we're talking about like my iCloud. And like I am setting my kid up as a kid in that account. We're not giving them their own iCloud account.
Correct. So they will have their own iCloud account, but it lives underneath yours. So within every Apple family, so to speak, you're allowed to have two adults in there. One of them, it can be an organizer, so to speak. So that main person who's really running the account, all the charges funnel to them. And then you're allowed to have your children underneath. So as long as they're underneath you, you can kind of monitor the things that are going on. And that's one of the ways that I use to monitor my children's devices is I use Apple's screen time feature. That's one of the main ones that works for me. Google for Android has a similar one. It's called Family Link. Works in a very similar way where once you set up that child account underneath yours, it helps you set up web filters. It helps you set up how much time they can spend in certain apps, all of those sorts of things. You can set up things that allow them to contact certain people and not others. So a lot of those features come built into that entire process, which makes it easy. But there are also a lot of third-party apps who focus on that as well. You have one of the popular apps is called Bark. Another one is called Custodio, spelled with a Q. So that's really one of those weird ones. But if you go through the app stores on each of the devices, you'll see that there are a ton of different apps out there that claim to do certain things. But for me, it's those built-in ones that are actually my favorite.
We'll start with the built-in ones, and then we're going to go into specifics of the other ones that you like that are, the third party. So the built-in ones, what do you think is the most important to set up and have in place before they start to use that phone? Gotcha.
So once you set up that child account underneath your device, you want to go to your screen time settings if you're an iPhone user. That's the majority of people, so I'll kind of focus on that. I'm an iPhone user. Everything in my house is pretty much Apple devices, iPads, things like that. So what's nice is once you set it up once, even if you give them an iPad or you give them a phone, whatever the case is, if they're logged into that device with their iCloud account, those settings will mirror each other. So that's the key. Now, a couple things that I set up instantly is you want to make sure that they can't change their account. That's one key. So obviously kids are like, I'll just log out. I won't be a part of this family thing. I'll just put in a new account. So that's one of those screen time settings you want to make sure you lock down. Another one that I like to lock down is the password change settings. So I make it so that my daughter can't change her passcode on her own because I want to be able to get full access to that device when I want it. So if she wants to change her device password, she has to come to me. There's also settings for contacts. So you can have it two different ways. You can have it where your child is allowed to set up all of their contact list, or you can have it where you have to approve certain people being in there, who they can talk to at certain hours. And the same goes for that app usage. So you can tell your child, you can have 2 hours on TikTok, or you can have 1 hour on YouTube, or things like that. So there are so many different settings in there. Some web filtering stuff that looks at their age and decides what websites are good. So just a number of different settings that you can go into, but those are the main ones that I focus on.
Coming up, our most streamed episode of Mom Squad in 2024 was about ADHD in girls and how doctors are now looking for signs that are much different than in boys. We revisit how to identify those behaviors and also teens and weight loss. Now prescription drugs are part of the treatment plan. A doctor explains how it's impacting kids and obesity. Welcome back. Nearly 6 million children in the U.S. have attention deficit hyperactive disorder, or ADHD. There's a myth that this is a boy's disorder, but doctors are finding more and more that it's showing up differently in girls. This interview was the most watched streamed episode. Take a look at part of my conversation with Dr. Mike Radovian with Akron Children's Hospital about those differences and what to look out for. ADHD. This is something I think every parent kind of wonders at some point, is my child struggling with this? Is there something that I need to get them tested for? What do you think, before we delve into how it presents differently in females and males, what do you think are the main signs? What should a parent or a teacher be looking for in terms of, should I get my kid tested?
Absolutely. So there are kind of two different subtypes of ADHD. We'll start there and I'll explain why in a minute. So there is the inattentive subtype, and then there's the hyperactive subtype. And then of course there is the combined subtype where kids exhibit symptoms of both. But in general, kids with ADHD struggle with impulse control, so impulsivity. These are the kids who blurt things out in the middle of class, or who are interrupting a parent's conversation over and over and over and over and over. They are hyperactive, naturally. It's part of the acronym. So these are the kids who are getting up in the middle of class, running around the room, can't sit still, have a hard time playing quietly, sometimes have a hard time moderating their voice. They speak excessively loudly because they're just so excited about all of the things. And then there's the inattentive symptoms. So these are the kids who are having a hard time organizing things, having a hard time staying on task. You tell them, hey, I need you to go grab your book bag from your room, get your shoes on, and then meet me by the kitchen door so we can get ready to go to school. And then 15 minutes later, you find them with one shoe on, the book bag half zipped, and they're playing with a Lego. And you say, dude, what happened? And they say, what? Oh, my mistake. So all of these symptoms kind of get categorized under ADHD symptoms. And the important thing is that they are disruptive to at least two domains. So typically, we're saying school and home. So if a teacher is saying, hey, your child is not doing so hot, they're disrupting class, they're not paying attention, they're obviously staring out the window, and then you're noticing that at home as well, that would be a sign to say, maybe we need to get this checked out a little bit more in detail.
Some of those symptoms that you mentioned, to me, I just know from parents that I know that have gone through it, or even like looking at my own children, sometimes it gets chalked up to like, oh, that's just their personality. At what point do you think if somebody even has a question, do they go to a doctor and ask?
I think it never hurts.
Okay.
And I think that sometimes it is, yes, very much a normal part of childhood to be super excited and hyperactive and sprinting around your backyard because you are just so hyped up. But there are other times that it gets in the way of things. And that's when we become concerned. Because, you know, if a kid is like you said, that's just their personality. They're exuberant, they're bubbly, they're all over the place a little bit. And they're maybe a little scatterbrained, and that's okay. They're still doing what they need to do. They're not getting in trouble at home. They're getting decent grades at school. They're keeping things organized. They're not losing stuff all the time. Okay, no big deal. Yeah. That's the last D in ADHD, disorder. Once it becomes disordering or disruptive to what they are doing for their day-to-day stuff, that's when we need to really be concerned.
And then let's talk about the differences between how it presents in boys and how it presents in girls, because I did look at this list as I was preparing here. And it's so different.
It is.
And I think that a lot of parents might be wondering what's going on with her, and it's not the typical signs that we just talked about sometimes.
Right.
So how does it present differently? And then maybe even we'll go into why does it even present differently in girls?
So it's kind of interesting because as you look at some of the statistics nationally, you're looking at a wide difference in girls being diagnosed with ADHD versus boys. Depending on the study that you look at, it can be anywhere from 3 to 16 times more likely in boys. But then as you get to the adult ADHD population, it's more or less equal. So what we have kind of found is that girls tend to be more of the inattentive subtype. They get diagnosed with that, we'll put it that way. They're less likely to act out in the middle of class. They're less likely to be flagged by their teacher as she's up and sprinting around the room, this is a problem, whereas a boy is more likely to engage in those kinds of behaviors. So there's millions of different explanations that people have for that. I don't know that there's a biological explanation. I think that part of it is related to normal social development. So girls tend to understand social norms and understand how to play socially a little bit faster than boys, and boys are more exercise, go, play with the ball, run around. And those impulses are harder to control for a kid with ADHD. Whereas a girl in the middle of class, they might have that fidgety, I need to do something, but they know that they're not supposed to, and a boy does too, but it's hard. And they're less likely to act out in that way. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's less likely.
Well, nearly 1 in 5 kids ages 2 to 19 are considered obese. Within the last 2 years, the American Academy of Pediatrics approved weight loss drugs to treat kids on top of diet and exercise. This conversation caught a lot of attention online. Here's part of my interview with pediatric endocrinologist Lena Al-Khalid with the Cleveland Clinic. Weight loss drugs are becoming more and more popular, not just with adults, but we're seeing statistics about teens being treated with these weight loss drugs. Is that something that you are seeing?
Yes, absolutely. So we are seeing more and more actually patients and their families are more aware of that disease of obesity and the impact it has actually on their life, on different aspects actually of their life, complications in the future, and the burden it has. It can cause in the future in terms of like long-term complications.
So these weight loss drugs are beneficial for even what age would you say is a healthy age that can start these weight loss drugs?
Yes. So for the weight loss medications, definitely there are certain criteria before we go ahead and start these medications. So any patient who comes to us for management for childhood obesity, these patients usually they go through a very comprehensive weight management program, and we usually start with the intensive healthy lifestyle changes, and then certain patients we can see that they actually qualify for the use of these medications. And usually it's for patients who are 12 years and above with the disease of obesity, and make sure that these patients also do not have any contraindication for the use of these medications.
So this has been, as we're all learning, I mean, it's just such a hot button topic right now. Every time I turn around, I'm seeing some sort of headline about Ozempic, Wegovy, the generic version. So these have been around a while. I mean, have kids and teens been using these drugs already, and we're just kind of hearing about it as specific weight loss tool? Because it's been used with diabetics.
So these were actually approved for diabetes management in adults. There have not been actually approved for use of for diabetes in pediatrics yet.
Okay.
However, the semaglutide has been just approved for the use of for weight management use in pediatrics, just actually as of last year. For the semaglutide specifically, we're still waiting for the FDA approval for diabetes management. But these medications they've been around for a long period of time. With these, actually, we have the same class of medications we've been using it for decades now. We're just kind of we're having like newer generations of these medications with better efficacy, and now it's been used for weight management in adults also for a longer time, and now we're just trying to switch this and actually maybe use it also for management of obesity in pediatrics.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, as a parent, my first initial reaction when I see that teens, and I don't have a teen yet, but if I had a teen, I would my first question would be, is this safe? Is this okay? Is there going to be any like long-term effects? Have we really been using it that long that we know that this will help and not harm?
Yes. So these, as I said, these medications been around. They've been around actually for decades now. They've been used for so many, mainly for the indication of diabetes management. We have been using it more in adults for decades for weight management. So, but like again, with any medication, with the use of any medication, a percentage of patients might develop side effects. So that's why it's very important to carefully identify the patients who actually qualify for these medications, learning more about your patient, make sure that there are no contraindications that can cause long-term side effects or implications on health. And again, whenever we are using these medications, we still need to see our patients and monitor them clinically and sometimes even laboratory, like actually just doing a lot of tests long-terms and just seeing them more often to make sure that they are not developing these side effects and they're actually responding to the medication appropriately and that no adjustments are needed.
After a quick break, Dr. Lisa Damour joins us. If you don't know Dr. Lisa, she is the leading expert on adolescent development. Disney even used her to develop Inside Out 2. She talks about how to understand your teen's emotions. Welcome back. Teens are tough, and most parents will tell you it's a time for attitude, distance, and a lot of emotions. Earlier this year, we sat down with Dr. Lisa Damour, a child psychologist, author, and advisor to Disney. She actually helped create the character of Riley for Inside Out 2. We sat down to talk about what's really going on in your teen's brain and how to react to it. I'm picturing emotional teen who had a bad day, and you mentioned, wanting to go and listen to music or wanting to go, and there's that isolation. And I think what I hear most from parents who say, "Oh gosh, this is so hard. She doesn't want to talk to me. He doesn't want to open up to me," and you just listed those things of, how do we know that there is no sort of self-harm or they're not lashing out at a friend at school? Like, how do we get them to open up? And can we? Or is that making it worse?
Okay, well, so let's talk about why they don't open up. Because I've asked teenagers this very question. I'm like, those times when your parent or caregiver can see you're upset and you are giving them nothing, like, what's the deal? And they're like, oh, there's many reasons. So one reason they said is, we know what you're gonna say. Like, I'm upset because I messed up a test, and it's the test you asked me if I was ready for, and I told you yes, but apparently I wasn't, and I don't want to hear it. Okay, that's a reason. Sometimes we're afraid you're going to tell other people. These things feel very private to teenagers, even if they don't seem like a big deal to us, and so they can be reluctant to share because they don't want it going anywhere. But my favorite response I ever got, and it was so insightful, it was this junior girl, and she said, by the time I get home, I'm like 90% of the way over what made me upset. And rehashing the whole thing for my mom isn't going to help me feel better, which is totally fair.
Yeah.
So talking is an option if the teenager wants to do it. It is one of many options. Okay, but then there's the when to worry question. Right? You have a kid who seems very shut down or very reserved, and you get anxious. So what I can tell you is what we expect to see is that kids are thriving outside of the home, and they come home and are sort of grumpy or cranky or quiet. If you as a parent or caregiver check in with the school and they're like, your kid's great, they're so chatty, they're so fine, even if you're like, my kid? That's what we expect to see in development. If other adults are worried about your kid, if you are hearing concerning signs from other places besides your kid being reclusive at times and grumpy in the house, then it's time to worry. But one of the things I like to say, it's kind of corny, but school gets the best of them, we get the rest of them.
Yeah.
And that's really like, how wouldn't we want it just that way, right? It's hard to hold it together all day at school.
Yeah, but then so many parents take it personally.
Yes.
I know we've talked about it before on this show, but then it's hard because then, and again, my oldest is 10, so I know I'm headed for this, but what I hear from all my friends is like, well then, I'm getting the rest of them. And I want to know what's happening in their lives, and I want to make sure that I'm having that relationship. But inside their minds, are they going, oh, mom is so uncool. I don't want to, is that what's happening in their minds? Or is it that they do want their privacy and maybe are they worried, mom's going to be disappointed or dad's going to be disappointed?
Okay. Yes to all of that.
Okay.
All right, so let's start with a few ways to understand
This is my own therapy session here.
You got it. I'll bill you later.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, the job of a teenager is to become independent, to get ready to move out. This is quite a job to try to accomplish while your parents know what you ate, how long you slept, if you wore that t-shirt yesterday, right? I mean, we have so much information about our kids. So part of how kids work towards independence is they first accomplish the psychological independence. I'm just going to be more private while you guys drive me everywhere and know all the other details.
Right.
So that's part of what's happening. Another way we want to think about this is, I mentioned my first commercial book, Untangled. It centers on girls, 80% applies to kids of all genders. And what I do in that book is I lay out the 7 jobs of being a teenager. Those are the chapter titles. So it's parting with childhood, joining a new pack, harnessing emotions, contending with adult authority, planning for the future, entering the romantic world, and learning how to care for themselves. Okay, that's a lot to accomplish.
Yeah.
And the reason I wrote that book, and the reason I wrote it that way, is to remind adults, adolescence is not something our kids are doing to us. It is a very challenging developmental time that they are working their way through.
As a reminder, you can find all of these episodes, all of the full episodes of our Mom Squad on the Mom Squad YouTube page. There are so many great topics and experts. I hope you check it out. And in the coming weeks, we are going to have some great topics to make 2025 your happiest and healthiest yet. Thank you for joining me on Mom Squad. I'm Maureen Kyle. Have a wonderful holiday season.